All right, so thanks for joining this webcast series. I'm Elliott Rosenfeld. I work as a senior learning content developer for Infoworks 360. On the line with me, we have Willie Campbell as well as Jeff Hansen, who are respectively from Infoworks 360 and Revit, working on product support and learning content. This webcast series, if you haven't checked it out before, we try and hold twice a month on the first and third Wednesdays of the month. We're hoping to inform you about the civil product lines, the features, and the perspectives of our product team. We won't open up this series to audio feedback from the attendees, but we do give you a chance to ask questions and provide you feedback using the chat or question panel in GoToWebinar. So we're just really trying to unite civil product users and makers into more of this maker movement. Be sure to check out on Wednesday, December 7th, our next webcast, which will be on the subject of developing custom material styles in InfraWorks 360. This can be a pretty handy workflow. You can actually really create these level of detail specific material styles to add that context and visual display to your InfoWorks 360 models. You can register for upcoming webcasts using the InfoWorks 360 community site, the forum, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. So just check out one of those platforms for the announcements for our next upcoming webcasts. And just as a reminder, we're skipping what would have been a mid-November webcast due to the occurrence of Autodesk University. So now I'd like to kick off with some polls for our users to check out. So I'm going to kick off a poll, and we'll just take a minute or two for each poll. Keep in mind that we allow multiple answers, so the percentage answers that I report will not be proportional and will not line up with 100%. So hopefully you should be able to see this poll in progress. I'm seeing people voting. I'm going to give it another 30 to 40 seconds for everyone to finish this poll. Great. It looks like about 80% of the attendees on the line have voted. And let's see if I can screen share this poll. A few more votes trickling in. Okay, so the results of that is we had 11% of our attendees don't even have InfoWorks 360 installed. 17% have installed it and played with it a few times. 26% have dabbled in it on a few projects. 39% regularly use InfoWorks on some projects. That's nice to hear. And 7% almost use it on every project, couldn't live without it. It's nice that we've got a good spread of different experience levels for this webcast. So I'm going to open up the next poll, which is what type of work do you do with InfoWorks 360? The answers are, your possible choices are site design, road design, GIS, data compilation, residential design, or visualizing projects. Okay, I'm going to give you another couple seconds to finish voting here. It looks like 81% of attendees have voted on this second poll. And I'm going to close it out. So again, because you could vote for multiple answers, these numbers don't line up to 100%, but the spread there was 57% of participants said that they used InfraWorks 360 for site design, 50% said they used it for road design, 42% said they used it for GIS data compilation for early project planning, 27% said they used it for residential design, and 82% said they used it for visualizing projects. Again, that's a great spread, and maybe after this webcast, we'll be able to bring up that 27% residential design number when you're a little bit more familiar with how to bring your Revit data into InfoWorks 360. So I'm just going to do the last poll really quickly, and then we'll move on with the webcast. This third poll is asking you, what part of InfoWorks 360 would you like to see some improvements made to? Possible answers are road design, site design, residential design, rail design, or other. And I'm noticing that some people are typing in their some questions here in the question panel. Let's see if I can start answering these. So one question here is, what is the difference between residential and site design? I think the answer to that would be the site design would really more relate to some of your underlying infrastructure for a structure. So that would be some of the terrain shaping, possible utilities, other kind of related infrastructure necessary before you can actually put in a residence. Someone has commented that their other category was airport design. Someone commented that there should be an option in this poll for bridge development. So we'll count that also. We'll take note of that. And someone has also noted that they use InfraWorks for interaction with Navisworks, which is great. And we're actually going to very briefly touch on Navisworks in this webcast today, just briefly. And someone has also said more detailed utilities. So that's great. Thanks for all these answers. I'm going to close this last poll. It looks like 79% of attendees have voted. I'm going to close that out. So the final tallies on that poll was that we had 34% of attendees said that they would like to see improvement in road design. 62% said they'd like to see improvement in site design. 30% said they'd like to see improvement in residential design. 32% said they'd like to see improvement in rail design. And 39% said they'd like to see improvement in another category, which I just went over. There's actually a couple more comments to that other category. So a couple more comments there were that they'd like to see improvements in grading and earthwork development, and that they picked rail design, but specifically that would, for this user's use case, that would apply to light rail design or commuter rail design. This is awesome. Thanks for this feedback. We definitely take this into account, and this is sent up to our product teams. So this is valuable for us to have. One last comment there was aerial cable design. That's cool. I've actually not heard many people asking for that. Great. So I'm going to close out these polls and move forward with this webcast. So make sure after this webcast or at any time during the webcast to just check out all the offerings we have for InfraWorks 360 users and actually other infrastructure users in Civil and Navisworks and Revit. We've got a great, really active user forum where a lot of our expert elites and employees are pretty frequently answering your questions. It's open to anyone of any experience level to just shoot some questions off on the forum. We have an idea station where people can post and upvote or downvote in a kind of a Stack Overflow model different ideas for the future of InfraWorks 360, and these votes do count towards what our product development teams use to prioritize the addition of new features and enhancements. We've got a great platform called InfraTips, which are quick tricks and tips that are authored by our employees who are working on the product. We've got a user gallery where you can share your own projects. You can check out other user projects and comment. There's some pretty stellar examples of how InfoWorks 360 can be used on those galleries. We've got a social hub where you can share and comment and like on different social media platforms related to InfoWorks 360. We have videos as well as recordings of these webcasts, such as the one that we're in right now, are also posted on the videos tab of our community site. And we also do notify you of upcoming webcasts as well. So if you have a chance, if you haven't already, be sure to check out this autodesk.com/InfoWorks360 community site and use the tabs at the top to access these other resources. And here's just a quick disclaimer. I'm not sure if this will completely apply to this specific webcast, but it's important to know that some of the features in InfoWorks 360 that we do feature in these webcasts are what we call preview or technical preview features, which means that they're not formally supported features. So these statements are not intended to be a promise or guarantee for future delivery of products, services, or features, but just reflect our current plans, which are subject to change. So that's just important for you to know, that we assume no obligation to update the forward-looking statements I may make during this webcast, but I'll try to keep it to be pretty accurate with what is actually coming and what is available now. And please, throughout this webcast, ask a lot of questions. You can use the question or chat panel in your GoToWebinar little tool panel to ask us questions. We have Jeff and Willie, myself, standing by to answer questions. If for some reason we don't have the answer for you right now, or we just don't have the time to get to it, we will be preserving these questions and making sure to get back to you if we didn't get a chance to answer it in this hour. Again, we're not going to be opening up the audio for attendees because we wouldn't have the time to answer all your questions vocally, but the more questions, the better. So let's get started. My name is on this, but just please also note that Jeff Hansen and Willie Campbell are a very integral part of making this webcast happen. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Willie Campbell to start with Revit 2017. So let's change the presenter to Willie. Willie, can you hear me? And would you mind speaking up, see if we can hear you?
I can hear you. Can you hear me all right?
Totally.
Good. All right. Let me know when you can see my main screen here. You should be looking at Revit 2017.
Yeah, that just came in.
Excellent. Okay. So the last comment that Elliott made, actually, first of all, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Willie Campbell. I work in enterprise priority support with Autodesk, and my focus is mostly on the Civil InfoWorks side. I do know enough about Revit to be dangerous, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about Revit today and how we can make our Revit models that we have come in and drop right in what we're expected inside of InfoWorks. So to Elliott's point a minute ago about future statements, this is all current versions, Revit 2017, InfoWorks 2017.2. So You should be able to do what we're doing today as soon as we're done with the webcast, so check it out yourself and see how that works for you. So I'm just going to use, so again, Revit 2017, I'm just going to use the Revit sample project. So I'm just going to open this up here. It'll take just a second. And this is just the out-of-the-box Revit architecture sample. There is a structural sample now that Revit is all compiled into one release instead of separating architecture and structural, things like that. So what we want to do first is we want to change our view. So this is just a view all. You've got on the left-hand side, we've got these different views, these different pages, different levels of the Revit model. So what I want to do is switch to a 3D view, and you can see on the side here, we have 3D views and the 3D view, the default, and I can double-click that, or I can come up to the View tab here and select 3D view as well, and that'll switch us to the 3D view. I'm just going to give a double-click, and it's going to open up our 3D view. So this is great for Revit. You can see that there's some trees in there. There's the house, the driveway, a car. We've got some wind turbines, all kinds of cool stuff in here. One thing to remember when you're bringing a Revit model into InfraWorks, and I'll start here, is it's basically what you see is what you get. So if I were to take this model as is with the terrain that's represented as terrain in Revit and bring it into my InfoWorks model, it's going to look exactly like you see here. The difference is once it comes into InfoWorks, I don't have any control over layers and things like that, so I wouldn't be able to then turn off the terrain. InfoWorks doesn't recognize this as terrain, so it would basically come in and sit on top of or below the surface that you have. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a new 3D view. I'm simply going to take the default, right-click on it, go to Duplicate View, click Duplicate, and I'm going to right-click again and rename that to Navis. And I'm going to do this because when we bring in the Revit model into InfoWorks, Navisworks is what's used to process that. So if you have Navisworks manage locally on your machine, it'll process locally or it'll process through the cloud, but it still uses Navisworks to do that. So this sends everything through Navisworks. The next thing I want to do is actually get rid of this terrain because it's not usable inside our InfoWorks model. So I can come over here to Visibility and click Edit, and this opens up a visibility panel. And I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here until we get Topography, and I'm simply going to uncheck that. And then click OK, and you'll see that the topography, everything that's defined as topography in the Revit model will disappear. We've got some trees here. They're not great examples, but if I switch to a top view here, you can see we've got these trees represented. I want to hide those as well. So I'm going to highlight these trees, and I can right-click, and I have a couple of options for Hide in View. I can hide the elements, which are just the ones that I've selected, or I can hide the category. So any other trees will also be hidden. So I'm going to select Category and let those disappear. So now I have everything in the model that I want to see that'll come into my InfoWorks model. So I'm going to right-click and zoom to Fit, so it'll fit into my panel here. And you'll probably also notice that in the top view, my north is rotated, so it's not actually directly north in the view. So this is how the sample model is set up. What we want to do is we want to change what's called the base point, or the project base point of this model. So right now, it's not visible. I can use, down here at the bottom, there is a little light bulb icon here. It's called Reveal Hidden Elements. I can select that. That's going to turn on everything that's been hidden in the project, but you can see my terrain is back, and you can see my trees are back. But you'll also notice right here on the corner, this is my project base point. And if I click on it, it gives me some information. It gives me a north-south and an east-west coordinate, and it also gives me the angle to true north, and that's what's represented by the twist here. I'm actually going to check that light bulb again because I don't want to see all that information. I'm going to go back to my visibility graphics, click Edit again, and this time I'm going to come down to Site. I'm going to expand Site, and under that I'm going to find the project base point. I'm going to click that. Click OK, and now you can see that project base point is now visible in my project here, in my Revit model. So you can see I have a north-south and an east-west. And what in InfraWorks, let's switch over here real quick. So this is actually outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is part of one of the sample files, the example files that we've set up inside of InfraWorks. And we've just picked a small area outside of the city. And as I zoom in here, you can see we've got some pretty big mansions probably. We've got a roundabout here at the end of this road. And I want to set my Revit model to line up on this roundabout. So back in Revit here, you can see that my project base point is located at the corner of the house here. And if I were to bring this in now, depending on where I set my point, my location point inside of Revit, that's where it's going to come in. So I actually want to move this project base point to the corner of the driveway over here. So with this selected, I can uncheck. Now, you can see that it brings up a move option. If I grab it and move it, it will move it. And you can see there's a little bit of a snap. I can move it to that corner, but what's going to happen is it's going to move my entire model. And that's not what I want. So I'm going to Control-Z to undo that. If I select the base point again and I check the little clip here, and this will change the clip state of that point. If I uncheck that, you can see that it's now crossed out. This means that I can move this project base point without actually affecting the model. Now, your architect friends, your coworkers are not going to be your friends anymore if you do this without the permission, without letting them know. So ultimately, I'm going to make a slight change to this model because I'm changing the project base point, and I will be doing a save as at the end just so I can make sure my architect buddies and coworkers are happy with me. So I'm going to drag this point now over to this corner of the driveway, and I'm going to let it snap to the end of that line. And I lost it. Let's try that again. Drag it over here. There we go. So you can see now that I've got that snap to the end point of my driveway there. I'm actually going to change the angle of true north. I'm going to reset that back to 0, so I'm simply just clicking on it, and you can see that it highlights. I'll enter 0, hit enter. You'll notice now that my north is now north to the building. But back in InfoWorks, I want this to line up on the roundabout, so I want to have this rotated. So I'm going to go ahead and set an angle back in Revit, and I'm actually going to set an angle of about 245. So you'll see now that my north is actually a little bit more than, quite a bit to the right. So when I bring this into InfoWorks, it's actually going to rotate my model to match the roundabout. The last thing that I want to do before we send this out, I'm going to uncheck the clip here, and I'm actually going to reset this to 0, the north-south and the east-west. So I can do it here by clicking on it and typing 0, and you'll see that it moves a little bit. And again, this is why we want to do a save as, so we're not angering the architects. But with the selected, I could also set it over here in the identity data panel, hit 0 here, and it is going to move again. So to find the model, I'll just right-click, zoom to fit. It's like a zoom extents in AutoCAD. So now everything is lined up. The reason that I set those, the north, south, and east, west at 0 is because if I had not reset that in Revit when I brought it into InfraWorks, that's still going to be an offset, and it's going to move my model away from the base point that I want to set inside InfraWorks to get it to line up perfectly. So back in Revit, the real last thing that I want to do is I want to come up to the Manage tab, and I want to find, under the project location, I want to find the location box. And I click on this, and it's going to bring up a window. Now, every time you do this, it's going to come up in Boston, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. I can start to type the name of an address, a street address, including city and state if I have it. In this case, I've already searched for, I did search for Albuquerque. Looks like it's missing there. It actually remembers the last coordinates of my last search, but I want to show you guys, as I zoom out here, I actually need to take this red pin with the house, and I need to drag and drop. So wherever I want it to be, I have to drag and drop it to that area. So we're going to be working outside of Albuquerque. And I'll zoom in here, and I'll get a little closer to where we're at. And I'm actually going to go ahead and use the previous area. And if I click there, that should move it right to where we want it to be. And then as I zoom in here to the model, it didn't remember it exactly. So we actually need to come down here a little bit. So it's just a drag and drop. And you can see now I've got my two streets here. If we look in InfraWorks, you can see that I've got the two streets here. This is actually the same area. I want to drag it in and drop it right at the end of that cul-de-sac. So I'm going to zoom in. And notice as we zoom in a little closer to that pin, this uses Bing Maps, and it uses the rotation, that slight rotation angle. So basically you can see now that I've got the cul-de-sac that we're looking at inside of InfoWorks. We've got that giant house next door. And since I have set up in my Revit model, my base point is the lower portion of that driveway, I'm going to drag this pin and I'm going to set it roughly right about here on the cul-de-sac so it joins up with the road. Now, if I had another building and I'm placing it over an image, I can come in here, and this bottom point of this pin is where the base point is going to get set to. So if I wanted to set it to this corner of this house or this corner of this house, wherever I wanted it to be, I can set it where, pretty specifically, and it's going to be really close to what, to where we need it to be. Is it going to be millimeters? No, it's not going to be millimeters, but it's going to be close for design intent purposes. So it gives me a latitude, it gives me a longitude 35.14 and a negative 106. I'm going to click apply or OK to accept that, and now I've set that project base point. And then finally, I'll just do a save as. I'm going to save it as a project. I'm going to send it to my desktop. I'm going to leave the name RAC Basic Sample Project. Click on Save and give it a second here. And we've got that all saved out now. I'm going to switch back over to InfraWorks. And in InfraWorks, I am simply going to drag and drop that file. So just from the desktop, I'm going to drag and drop and let it go. I could also go into my import data. And this will probably take about 30 seconds to process. So again, when we bring in the Revit file, it's going to use Navisworks to process locally. And if you don't have Navisworks installed, it will use the cloud, and it will use a cloud version of Navisworks to process this data. It will take longer if you don't have Navisworks installed locally. So we'll give it another second here, and the import data and the configuration panels will pop up. And you can see now that by dragging and dropping, InfoWorks has got to the point where it's intelligent enough to understand that this is a building. I could change the definition of type if I wanted to. The coordinate system by default is XYIFT. That's fine. And you'll notice now that in my local origin, X, Y, and Z, negative 106.48, 35.143. So everything is set up like I intended. And if I want to make sure what's happening with this model, I can always click the 3D Model tab here, and it'll bring up a preview of the model. This is also where I can simplify the model, 50%, 25%. It actually makes it lighter inside of InfoWorks. So if you have all of the interior pieces left inside your Revit model, all the little switches and things like that, it's gonna bring all that stuff in and kind of weigh down your InfoWorks model. But you'll notice here, as I move around, I go to a top view, you can see that the rotation is correct. And you can see that the corner, the blue and green line here, that's my base point. That's where I told the model to come in. So everything looks correct inside this model. What I have in InfoWorks, or sorry, InfoWorks, what I have in Revit is what's going to come in InfoWorks. So simple close and refresh. And you'll notice that that Revit model is going to drop right in on that roundabout exactly like I wanted. Now, when I start to flip the view here, you'll see some problems with this. This is just a random point in space that we picked, so the surface does not match the design intent of this Revit model. The purpose of this is just to show that we can get it to line up and drop right in on that roundabout and have it rotated. So you can see now that, yeah, this indeed, part of our house is sitting underground. That's okay. We would obviously pick the site design and have it, set up for a particular model. This is just a for instance. So that's the gist of it. And if you forget to, in Revit, if you forget to reset this to 0, the base point to 0, oops, I'm messing with stuff. If you forget to set the base point to 0, it will come in somewhere in the middle of your model, whatever those offsets happen to be. So you would need to change that before you export and save as again. All right, Elliott, I'm going to let you take the sexy stuff now.
Thanks, Willie. That was great.
No problem.
Really awesome demo. So as Willie demonstrated, that's really the best practice. That's the most intelligent way to bring that in. There are some other workarounds we can work with, especially if, say for instance, you're just not going to be able to change the project base point location because of the architect on your project just won't allow it. Before I get into that, I just wanted to look over some of these questions in the question panel. We had a question about what the values for the project base point and survey point are. I think Willie spoke to that, but just quickly, hey Willie, can you guys see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, great. I just wanted to quickly show you that in most cases you don't need to do this, but you can verify what units you're using for your project-based site. So I just open Revit. I'm going to go to View, go into the 3D view, and if I go to the Manage tab here, you can actually check out your project units. You may have noticed before that the project base location that the base point that Willie was referring to was using millimeters. It's good to know that your length unit is in metric because Infoworks by default, especially if you're using Model Builder, is going to be use metric lengths. So you may have a conversion issue if you're using an imperial foot measurement. You can also change this to meters if you want to simplify. You can change the number of decimal points that are rounded. I guess I can change to meters just for the sake of it right now. Another question that was asked.
Elliot, sorry, I was just gonna say I saw a question that somebody was asking about the Revit materials coming across using the RVT file. So that was one of the main reasons also that I set up that Navis view from 3D view. I found that if you export the 3D view and do a save as, if you have custom textures, they typically will not come across, but if you set up that Navis view, Navis will look for that first, and it actually does a really good job of bringing even customized textures across with your RVT file. So if you forget that step, make a 3D view, call it Navis, and then save as again, and it should bring all those materials across. And also one thing I always forget to mention, linked files. So if you have linked files, which is basically an XREF in Revit, those will not come through. It has to be live in your Revit model to come in.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and that's a perfect segue. The next question I was going to address is, do I need to have the same version of Navisworks if my model is made by Revit 2017? You do need to have Navisworks and Infoworks 360 aligned. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if you need to have Navisworks and Revit aligned, but if you're going to be using Infoworks 360 2017, especially for a locally imported operation, you're going to want to have Navisworks 2017 installed. And actually, I want to quickly show you one setting that is a default setting in Navisworks, but if you've already messed with this in the past for a different project, it's good to know how to set it up for this workflow. So I'm just opening Navisworks Manage 2017. You'll see that I'm actually using a trial version of Navisworks at the moment because it works just the same for this workflow. So just give it a second to load. And let me close this intro dialog. Just one thing you're going to want to know if you're using Navisworks is if you go to the Navisworks drop-down and Options, and you go to your file readers, you want to make sure that your Revit is using a Navisworks view converter. So that's a default setting, but if for any reason you've changed that in the past, that may mess with your workflow. So that's just a good one to know. And again, you do want to have Navisworks 2017 if you're using Infoworks 2017. And I'm honestly not certain about what version of Revit you need to have, but I would assume it's safe to work across year-to-year versions. So I would say beyond 2017 exclusively for all three products is going to be your best bet, or 2016 for all three. So let's look at some of these other questions. So another question, got a lot of questions coming in here. So yeah, the trial, I think I answered that. You can use a trial version of Navisworks. Can we expect cul-de-sacs to be added to Infoworks in the future? I can't really speak to that. I know that our product team wants to make that happen. I'm not sure where that is on the roadmap. Another question here is, if I export to FBX or Collada, will it keep the locations and rotations as well? So that's a good question. DAE I wouldn't recommend for this workflow. FBX or IFC are acceptable options. However, the workflow that Willie just showed us is a, I already did this in this model. I'm going to open a different model. The workflow that Willie just showed us with the RBT file format is the most intelligent option. And in most cases, it's the one you should be using, unless for some reason you can't. Say that you have an FBX file and you need to use that. I can show you how we can do that. So here in Revit, I've gone to the 3D view. I'm going to actually, let's go back to Infoworks really quickly. So here we are. We see the same site location that Willie was showing us. And this is, again, this is more of a workaround than maybe necessary, but sometimes it's useful to know. You can use a point of interest in Infoworks to actually populate your latitude, longitude, and elevation information. So say that I'm just going to choose that same cul-de-sac location roughly that Willie was using and choose any type of point of interest to draw. I'll just use this purple thumbtack. And if I zoom in and just double-click to draw this point of interest, you can see that it loaded. It's pretty small. I'm just going to make it bigger just so we can see it. When I deselect this point of interest and open the data sources panel in Infoworks, the data sources tools, and then open the scripting console, you can actually populate the latitude, longitude, and elevation for this point of interest and every other point of interest in your model using a simple script. This is a script that's actually posted in a Infratech, which is the platform that I referenced earlier. You can search for it, report lat long elevation for a POI with a simple script. I'm also going to post this into the chat panel for our webinar so that you can reference that. If you need to, just Google that. Actually, I'll just give you the link while I'm at it. So I'm going to grab this script. I'm just going to copy and paste it. And I'm going to go back to Infoworks, and I'm just going to paste the script into my scripting console and start the script. You can see that feature 1, which refers to the one point of interest I have in my model. If I had more point of interest, it would tell you feature 2, 3, 4, the number of features, was updated. So now if I close the scripting console, I select my point of interest and expand the stack, the user data field has populated my latitude, longitude, and elevation. I can hover and see that. So I'm going to just double-click, select all, copy it, coming back to Revit. I'm going to manage and go to my site location, and I'm just going to paste that in and search. So there you can see that if I zoom in a little bit, I guess this is all 20, oh, there we go, I had to click in. You can see that it's actually pretty precisely just added that. It's using the latitude, longitude, elevation I populated in Infoworks. Put it in this project address bar. It's actually found a street name and a zip code in New Mexico. We're just going to press OK. So this is the same operation that Willie showed to define your project location. So with FBX, it's not going to be as intelligent. So a good thing to do here is show the hidden elements in Revit. And you can see here the default project base point as well as a survey point. You're going to need to use the north, south, and east-west offsets in Infoworks in order to bring in our FBX file and locate it correctly. So what you can do here an easy thing to do here is just get a sense of where Revit is by default locating this model. If I right-click, let me try that again, with my project base point, oh, sorry, I have to unclick the little, what do we call this? This little icon, doohickey. So once it's unselected or it's got the pink slash across it, I can right-click and move the project base point to the startup location. So there you can see that this startup location is actually what Infoworks is going to read in FBX format. So just so you know, you cannot ever change the startup location in Revit. It's kind of like it's the default location that Revit is assigning to this model. So you can see that this actually, this middle point in the house is what the FBX format when I export from Revit is going to use. So I'm going to quickly just undo, Control Z. So that was just to show you that that's where your offset is going to come in. That's where you're going to need to make some adjustments if you're exporting to FBX. So you can choose a survey point or a project base point. I'm just going to click the project base point. Again, I'm going to do what Willie did here and drag it. Try to drag it. Sometimes I have to try this a few times. Well, Revit's just taking its time. I'm going to Control Z real quick. And I'm going to grab this project base point. Let's see. Bear with me now. This is just, you have to be careful with your operation. And see if I can get it to snap to. There we go. Oh, did I lose it? I lost it. Let's try that one more time. I'll rotate a little bit so I can see this better. That's fine. Okay, I'm hoping that
this was also part of the reason that I turned off the topography, because it adds so many extra elements in there that it makes it sometimes hard to navigate around and move the point. So this is a pretty simple model. Yes, this is a pretty simple model. So you might have pretty complex models. So just you can always hide them and then show them later on if you decide you need to have those to make it simple.
Thanks for that tip. Again, so what I did there is I just turned off the reveal hidden elements as Willie's recommending, which is a great idea. I'm opening the visibility and graphics under view, expanding the site, and just turning the project base point back on. You can hit apply or OK. Maybe you do need to hit apply in this method. So what we got here? So we've got that on, and I'm going to turn off the plantings, which were what those trees that Willie turned off. That's actually our plantings. And I'm going to turn off the topography as well. So let's see how that turns out. Huh. For some reason it's not wanting to show me my project base point. That's interesting. Well, that's okay. Let's just do it with the survey point. So if I go to the site, I may have accidentally deleted my project base point when I was trying to snap it to. It is something that you can lose.
Oh yeah, the project base point is outside of the section box. We're getting some comments about that.
Oh really? This
Yeah.
section box? I'm sorry, I'm not seeing that on my screen. With okay, well, I'm just going to move forward with the. Why not use the volume of the? I see what you're saying. So I'm going to use the survey point, and you can see that I have these offsets, or I have the north-south and the east-west coordinates. If I wanted to, let's say that instead of moving forward with dragging to the end of the driveway, let's say that we're okay with the survey point here. What I'm going to want to do is note down this north-south and east-west numbers. So I have a negative 7.5314 north-south, and I've got a negative 29.0577 east-west. So I'm just writing that down. And when I come into Infoworks, so I'm going to actually, from here, let's make sure that I have my 3D view duplicated. And then I can rename this with a Navis prefix. And you can actually call it Navis anything, but I'm just going to call this a Navis sample. That's okay. And just for reference, if you don't have Navis here, Infoworks is going to read your 3D view as a default. And if you don't have Navis or 3D, Infoworks is going to read the last used view, 3D view from Revit. So that's just the order or hierarchy that Infoworks will read this. Navis, 3D view, last used. So once I've got my 3D view for the Navis reading enabled, I have written down my survey point or your project base point numbers. I'm going to export this to FBX. And you could do the same for IFC. You're just probably not going to have as much luck with your materials. Although IFC will be a lot quicker. I'm just going to call this Revit sample. And that should be fine. Saving it to my desktop. And so I'm going to come into Infoworks. I haven't checked out this questions. Willie, do you want to stop? Should we answer any questions at this point?
No, the only thing that we have are some comments about the selection box that was referred to. So it was an unhide
I see. Yeah, I was moving a little quick there. Well, thank you.
There is a question about, does Infoworks use an NWC file? What makes NWC, Revit, or Navisworks? So from Revit, you wouldn't use an NWC. The best option is Revit, RVT file, and then second would be FBX, and third would be IFC. But as you can see, that you've got some manual processing to do here with FBX and IFC, and also the IFC. I'm pretty sure you won't be happy with the colors because it's a quick process, but it doesn't bring out all the textures and everything. It's a very muted file. So if you don't need a super high-res nice model in your Infoworks, IFC is the quickest. But you still need to go through this process.
Yeah, and in terms of Infoworks using an NWC file, not really. It's Navisworks is processing the RVT file or the FBX file that you import and converting it into the Infoworks data sources panel. So it doesn't really strictly become NWC.
It does actually create.
Because your desktop will have a copy.
Yeah.
But you're not going to need to actually use that NWC file. You're not going to need to directly open it or really worry about that. It is kind of, Infoworks handles that for you as long as you have, again, maybe this is something we should have shown you earlier, in your application options, if you have Navisworks installed, you can enable the local import. If not, this conversion will just happen in the cloud as long as you have a valid E360 account and an internet connection. So either way, that's actually going to work out for you. So I'm just going to hit OK. I'm going to come back to the data sources panel. I'm going to bring in that FBX file as a 3D model from my desktop. Revit sample. I'm going to configure it.
Yeah, so I actually just went back and looked at my desktop real quick. So because I had saved my RVT file to the desktop, and then when I imported it into Infoworks, it does the processing in the background. Navisworks does create an NWC file that is used as it processes, but it's a seamless process. You don't have to worry about creating it in Revit or in Navisworks and bring that in. It automatically does it for you when you import it.
So here you can see that I brought in the FBX file and it's not reading my location. So this is where you're going to have to work a little bit with what we worked on earlier. So what you can do here is you can use your POI actually to populate your X, Y, and Z local positioning. And you're actually probably with RVT, you just kind of want to leave alone the coordinate systems. Infoworks is going to read that pretty precisely. In this case, with FBX, you may need to experiment with trying to leave it with your XY, IFT, international feet. But if you have a scale issue where it's basically 1/3 or 3 times the size, you may want to change this to an arbitrary XY metric coordinate system. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click cancel. I'm going to grab my lat long elevation one at a time. So there's my elevation. And I'm going to configure this and add my elevation. I'm going to grab my X figure. You may need to do some negatives there. Let's see. And I'm going to grab my next value. copy and configure. Let's see what I've got. So I just grabbed the wrong value. That's easy enough to fix. Just going to grab these all at once, put them in a Word doc, and just use them one at a time. So I've got my negative 106. It's important to note that you may need to reverse your positive negatives when you're doing this. So it's good to just kind of test this as you go along. So let's move again into configuring my FBX. So this is I have a positive 35 and negative 106. I may need to end up switching this. So let's just give that an OK for now. Let's come back to configure. Make sure that I have this specified as a building. Close and refresh. So as you can see, it's not where you wanted it to be. And that's because the X and Y are probably swapped. So if I just select my data source and just zoom to selected, you'll see that I'm way off in the middle of nowhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to return to home. I'll come back to my model. I'll right-click, configure. I'm going to make this a positive 106, this a negative 35, and I'm going to swap them. So I'm just going to use this as a placeholder for the second. Pop that again. Make sure we're good. Close and refresh. And let's delete this offset, which I left in there by accident. We may need to do one more swap here because I'm moving a little quick. Sometimes I confuse my X and Y's because the north, south, east, west, and yeah. Great. Okay. So come in here, grab your X value, delete my offset. Let's go to 0. Oh, InfraWorks. Okay, so I think we're good. Let's make sure this is 0 because it seems to retain its values. Close and refresh. Let's select this feature. And again, I'm still having it off in the middle of nowhere. Let's try that again. So I'm obviously having some configuration issues. Well, okay, so for starters, when you're here in FBX, you bring in your 3D model, you're going to want to use your latitude, longitude, and elevation from your Revit project site, which I'm moving a little too fast to demo effectively, but this will work. So let's unhide my project-based point. And I'm going to actually just recreate this model super quickly. Please be sure to post questions in the question panel while this is happening. I'm just going to redo this really quickly because I made it quick. I went a little too fast on this workflow. So what I did there is I deleted my Revit project. I removed the data source. I'm going to reopen Revit. I open my architecture project. It's simple. And yes, interactive placing you can, which makes this a lot easier. I'm trying to show you the specifics of the FBX. The interactive placing, yes, you can do, which is actually a pretty nice quick fix. So I can show that if that's helpful for users. So what I'm going to do is go to my project location. I'm going to go into Albuquerque, New Mexico. Using the nice handy map feature. That's about right. Let's zoom in. So I think we're about here. Let's go a little closer. And let's see. Let's just use the pre-populated data that I had built. Let's press OK. So I have my project site location established. I'm going to go to my visibility, make sure I have that project base point to work with, and the survey point. Let's apply that, hit OK. So I have my project base point here. I'm in millimeters because I haven't changed my project units. So you can see the offsets are about, in fact, there's 3 decimal points to the left. So I can see my offsets are negative 28,586 north-south and negative 27,014 east-west. So we're going to keep the topography just for the sake of time because Willie's already shown you how to get rid of that. So what I'm going to do now is just export to FPS again. So I'm going to move this to my desktop so I can grab it. Basic sample project. And let's save. Back in Infoworks, I'll switch to my home view. Bring in my 3D model, which looks like a Revit. It's just still saving. Okay, let's try that again. Open that up. Right-click and configure. So I'm going to want to grab my X and Y from this model location. Again, let's start with an interactive placing. This can be another quick fix for how you can grab your lat long. So the interactive placing just loads your model on your cursor. So again, it's got the topography and the trees that maybe we didn't want, but we know how to fix that. So I'm going to double click to place it. And there you have, an X, Y, and Z as a basis. I'm going to move quick here because there's only about a minute left. I got a little off track moving too quickly earlier. But the basic point here is that because Revit is assigning your starting point for the XYZ in Revit, you're going to need to use XYZ offsets using a project base point or a survey point. So I'm going to add my north-south and my east-west. My north-south offset in Revit was negative 28,586. I'm going to actually make that a positive, and my X becomes my east-west, which was negative 27,014 in the Revit, becomes positive 27,014 in Infoworks. I'm going to keep the Z at 0. I'm going to make sure this is configured as a building. Click, close, and refresh. What that is doing, I'm in meters in Infoworks, good thing to remember, so I don't want to do 28,000 because that's going to mess things up. Once I close and refresh, I should have my model come in. And there we have it. So what I did here, and we're a minute past the hour, so I'm just going to end this really shortly, is I've added an offset for the project base point to correspond to the difference between your project base point and your starting point in Infoworks. I'm also having high quality graphics, so Infoworks is not rendering. Let's stop there, and let's see if there's any final questions in the questions panel, because we're at the top of the hour.
There was a couple of questions that came in. Some of them were kind of some helpers along the way.
Cool.
For this. So I think a lot of the questions, I think mostly, there was quite a few about interactive placing, which you can obviously use. So the intent behind this is to try and take your model. Some people are perfectly okay with using interactive placing, and one thing to remember inside of Infoworks when you're using the interactive placing is you have the option to set rather than local origin of the model. When you're looking at just in a coordinate system, you can do a center 2D, center 3D, or a lower left front to be specific about that. There's been a lot of cases where I've seen where people say interactive placing is not good enough or not close enough. We want them to snap right in there. So there are some options to be able to, if you can figure out the offsets from the project base point so you don't have to change it like I did, then you could add those offsets in there. So the process that I showed was a simple bring it in, no fuss. When it comes in, it's processed in the right area rather than trying to figure out negatives and positives and meters and millimeters and things like that. So you certainly can. It's going to take a little bit of trial and error to do that. So you have those options.
Yes. And a couple of your comments here. I was moving a little quickly. Instead of using a point of interest in a script to load your latitude, longitude, and elevation, you can also use the status bar in Infoworks, which is at the lower left corner of your screen. Which is another good way when you're bringing in an FBX. Again, and I rushed through that, maybe not satisfactorily. Another way to, when you're bringing your FBX and you want to find out your coordinates, say for where this point of interest is, if I put my cursor here, you'll notice in the bottom left corner of Infoworks, it's showing you your X, your Y, and your Z. So that can be a good way to configure your data source when you're in that FBX stage. But I think we'll have to stop there because we're at the top of the hour. So you can take your cursor coordinates and use them to populate your local origin. It looks like we're not having any other questions here. And thanks again, Willie, for showing us that Revit import, because that really is going to be your go-to method. Hopefully you have access to the Revit model, and you're using Revit and Navisworks, and you have the Autodesk material library installed. So it's going to be, one of those really smooth transitions, imports and locations.
Yeah. So,
go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say there was a couple of comments about, having to do this each time if you've got, dozens or even hundreds of Revit models that you need to bring in. Obviously this would be a time-consuming process to do. This is, we're showing the capabilities of what it can do right now. In the future, there may be some options for a better process and just to be able to bring those in and have them line up. But the problem is the Revit models, typically those project base points, it's somewhere on the model, which is your 0, 0. Whereas with Infoworks and just like Civil 3D, it's a coordinate system, and there's many coordinate systems for every area that you live in, and they're in thousands or millions of units compared to the 0. So there's a little bit of change that has to be made there to get those to line up. But it's a work in progress. We're hoping for future better. We'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely something that is being worked on. And while I still have people on the line, I know we're over the time. I just wanted to give you a couple of tips that you may already know. But when you're in Infoworks and you're looking at just kind of your visual quality of your models, your buildings are going to kind of pop more visually. If you go into your 3D graphics and make sure you're optimizing for quality, if you uncheck the Show Backfaces option, that's going to allow you to actually zoom your mouse inside your building and see through your windows, which can be kind of a neat little trick if you're creating a storyboard. So let's zoom in. I'm in the bathroom right now, it looks like. And now, if I rotate carefully, again, this is hard because we're on kind of a fine scale. You can actually see.
I was going to say you can use your arrow keys as well to move the view around.
Yeah, the keyboard arrow keys work pretty well, but you can see that with my back faces options unchecked, I need to move my location in the building a little bit better, but you can see here we have the terrain outside the building. I think think that's a good stopping point. And please don't hesitate to check out the InfraWorks 360 community, and make sure that to also register for our next webcast, which is December 7th. We're skipping the mid-November because of Autodesk University. We will be focusing on developing custom material styles in InfoWorks 360. And that's it. Also check out our community site for our forum, info tips, idea stations, gallery if you have more questions or want to share your work. Thank you for joining, and have a great day.